They bet on her, but I bet on myself. When they handed me that empty suitcase at 18, they thought they were giving me nothing. They didn't realize they were handing me the freedom to build an empire they could never touch. Watch how I turned their rejection into absolute victory. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing who's listening. I am Jessica Neves, 34 years old, and I have learned that silence is the loudest weapon one can possess when the world decides to cast you aside. My childhood was defined by a stark, cold contrast that lived in the hallway between my bedroom and my sister's. While she was draped in the golden sunlight of unconditional parental adoration and financial security, I was relegated to the shadows, treated as an afterthought in our own home. My parents viewed her as the investment of a lifetime, pouring every spare cent into her whims, while they viewed me as an inconvenient expense waiting to be retired. The day of my 18th birthday arrived with the hollow promise of celebration, but it brought only a harsh reality. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table, their faces masks of indifference, and placed a dusty, empty suitcase in front of me. They spoke those devastating words, "The world is your trust fund," with a casual cruelty that still echoes in my mind today. I laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound born of sheer disbelief, genuinely thinking they were playing some sick, elaborate joke on their youngest daughter. But as I looked into their eyes, I saw no humor, no regret, and no love. They were dead serious about casting me into the abyss. At that moment, the naive, vulnerable girl I used to be finally died, and a cold, calculating version of myself began to take shape, ready to navigate the wreckage of my own life. I packed nothing into that suitcase because I had nothing to pack, and I walked out the front door, leaving behind a family that had already discarded me long before I ever made the choice to leave them. The weight of that empty bag was nothing, compared to the crushing weight of the realization that I was entirely alone in this vast, unforgiving world. I took a deep breath of the humid air, turned my back on the house that never felt like a home, and started my long walk toward a future I would have to build from absolute zero. The years that followed my departure were not kind, but they were remarkably efficient at sharpening my focus. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously, scrubbing floors until my knuckles bled and taking night classes in financial law while most people my age were out enjoying their youth. Every dollar I earned felt like a small, hard-won victory against the people who had claimed I would amount to nothing. I learned how money flowed, how it evaporated, and how it could be used as a shield or a sword. I watched from afar as my sister thrived, or so it seemed, in the glow of the trust fund that was supposed to be her infinite safety net. She traveled to exotic locations, posted photos of designer handbags, and launched a boutique that looked impressive on the surface but was rotting from the inside out. I knew the truth because I kept tabs on their public filings, learning the system better than anyone in my family ever cared to. They were living on borrowed time and borrowed credit, blinded by their own arrogance and the belief that the money would simply never run out. Meanwhile, I was quietly amassing my own modest fortune, not through handouts, but through grueling discipline and a refusal to fail. I bought property, invested in stable assets, and built a reputation for being the person who could fix the unfixable. My life became a testament to the fact that you do not need an inheritance to construct an empire. You only need the cold, hard ambition to survive when everything else has been stripped away. I never reached out, and they never looked back, content in their illusion that their golden child was a success and I was a failure. It was a beautiful, dangerous game of perception, and I was playing it perfectly, waiting for the inevitable moment when their reality would finally collapse under the weight of their own reckless spending and mismanagement. The silence between us was growing louder every single year. The collapse began not with a bang, but with a series of frantic, desperate emails that finally breached my carefully constructed barrier of silence. 16 years after that fateful birthday, The carefully curated facade of my family's life began to crack. My sister's boutique, which had always been a playground for her vanity, finally filed for bankruptcy, leaving behind a trail of unpaid debts and broken promises that extended far beyond her own accounts. The bank, hungry and unforgiving, was already circling the family home, threatening foreclosure on the property that had been the pride of my parents' existence for decades. It turned out that my parents had been leveraging everything they owned to keep the charade of my sister's success alive. Unaware that they were building a house of cards on a fault line, they had co-signed loans, dipped into their retirement funds, and even taken out a predatory reverse mortgage, all to ensure their golden child never had to face the sting of reality. Now the money was gone, the credit was exhausted, and the bank was moving to seize everything they had spent their lives protecting. They were drowning in a sea of red ink, their social standing vanishing along with their savings. My sister, true to form, had already vanished, leaving her mess for our aging parents to navigate alone. She was nowhere to be found when the notices arrived, proving that her loyalty was as fragile as the luxury items she had spent their life savings on. I received a message from my mother, her voice trembling in a voice note, asking for help in a way that sounded more like a demand than a plea. She did not ask how I was. She asked if I had money to stop the bank from taking the house. It was the same entitlement that had driven them to give me an empty suitcase all those years ago, yet now they expected me to be their savior. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it as I sat in my office, looking at the documents that outlined their impending ruin, feeling the cold, steady pulse of control finally beating in my own hands. I didn't answer the first few calls, choosing instead to let their desperation simmer in the silence I had mastered over the years. I needed them to feel the exact same hollow terror I felt when they sent me away with nothing but that empty bag. I visited their home under the guise of an objective financial advisor, a role I played with chilling precision. Walking back into that house was a surreal experience. The velvet curtains were still there, but they were coated in a fine layer of dust, and the air felt heavy with the stench of failure. My father sat in his favorite armchair, staring blankly at a television that wasn't even turned on, his mind already beginning to retreat into the fog of early-onset Alzheimer's. He didn't even recognize me when I walked in, his eyes passing over my face as if I were a ghost or a stranger. My mother looked haggard, her makeup failing to conceal the deep lines of stress etched into her skin. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, begging me to look at the paperwork scattered across the dining table. It was a chaotic mess of legal notices, late fees, and threatening letters from creditors who were ready to tear our family apart. I looked at the documents with the cold, analytical gaze of a professional, identifying the precise points where they had lost their leverage. They had no power of attorney, no valid estate plan, and absolutely no defense against the legal machinery that was now hunting them. They were completely vulnerable, stripped of the status they had held for so long, and forced to face the consequence of their own blatant favoritism. Watching them suffer was not the joy I had imagined it might be. Instead, it was a profound, quiet vindication. I saw clearly that they had not just failed me. They had failed themselves by choosing to anchor their entire existence to a daughter who was incapable of being their foundation. I held the keys to their survival in my briefcase, but I wasn't going to hand them over without ensuring they understood the cost of what they had done to me. I spent the next several days meticulously unraveling the Gordian knot of their finances, a task that required every ounce of the expertise I had built during my years of self-imposed exile. Every ledger I opened revealed a new layer of incompetence. They had been bleeding money into vanity projects that never had a chance of turning a profit. My mother watched me over my shoulder, her anxiety palpable, hoping for a miracle that would allow her to return to her life of superficial luxury. She didn't understand that the life she knew was gone forever, dismantled by her own bad decisions and the parasitic influence of the sister. I no longer claimed as kin. I felt a strange detachment as I worked, seeing these people not as the parents who had defined my early tragedy, but as clients whose assets were failing in the marketplace. I drafted a recovery plan that was brutally honest, cutting out every unnecessary expense and demanding a complete surrender of their remaining autonomy. They were hesitant at first, clinging to the remnants of their pride, but the looming threat of homelessness quickly dissolved their resistance. I told them that the house would be sold to settle the most urgent debts, and that they would be moving into a modest, managed facility where my father could receive the care his condition required. The shock on their faces was absolute, a mirror reflection of the pain I had felt when they discarded me. But I didn't blink. I was not doing this out of malice, but out of a rigid sense of justice. They had spent years investing in an illusion, and now they had to live with the harsh reality of the truth. I was the one with the expertise, the one with the steady hand, and the one who had finally earned the right to dictate their future. It was a role reversal so complete it felt almost theatrical, and I found myself savoring the quiet authority I commanded in a house that once only offered me rejection. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and for the first time, I felt like the architect of my own family's history. The final negotiations were held in an office that felt 1,000 miles away from the home I was dismantling. My sister made her grand appearance, looking as though she had just stepped off a yacht, still wearing the mask of someone who had never known a day of genuine hardship. She stormed into the room with a sense of entitlement that was genuinely breathtaking, demanding to know why I was meddling in our parents' affairs. She tried to charm the lawyers, flashing a practiced smile that had once been enough to win her everything. But the air in the room was sterile and cold, immune to her fading charisma. I sat across from her, my posture perfect, my document case locked, and I didn't even stand to greet her. I waited for her to run out of breath, for the sound of her own voice to expose the emptiness of her position. When she finally looked at me, she saw not the little sister she had ignored, but a woman who owned every single document that now determined her future. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had no leverage here. She was a guest in a reality that I had authored. I didn't raise my voice, but when I spoke, the room went absolutely silent. I laid out the financial ruin she had caused, item by item, pointing to the loans she had taken in our parents' names and the reckless spending that had drained their accounts dry. I had the records, the receipts, and the cold, hard math that stripped away the lies she had told herself for years. She looked at our mother for support, but my mother could only look at the floor, the realization of her own choices finally settling into her bones. My sister tried to spin a new story, but I cut her off with a single gesture, pulling out a legal document that would hold her accountable for every stolen cent. She was no longer the golden child. She was a liability that I was now going to manage with the same precision I applied to every other failed investment in my life. The shift was final, and the look of pure, unadulterated fear on her face was a sight I would never forget. With the legal paperwork finally in motion, I began the process of downsizing their existence, stripping away the excess that had masked their incompetence for so long. It felt like an archaeological dig into a civilization built on vanity and poor judgment. We went through closets filled with designer clothes that still had the tags on them, jewelry that was worth only a fraction of what they had paid, and boxes of memories that were tainted by the underlying rot of their financial secrets. My sister, now stripped of her social standing and her access to their bank accounts, paced the hallways like a caged animal, constantly looking for a way to manipulate the situation back in her favor. She didn't understand that the rules had changed. There were no more bailouts, no more blind eyes turned to her mistakes. and absolutely no more room for her in the life I was building for my parents. I was the one who signed the checks, the one who negotiated with the creditors, and the one who decided what stayed and what went. My father, blissfully unaware of the war being waged around him, simply followed me from room to room, trusting me with a quiet, childlike devotion that was both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. I ensured he was comfortable, focusing on the practical details that actually mattered: his medical appointments, his diet, and his security. My mother, once the queen of her social circle, was now learning how to live in a world where her influence meant nothing. She often tried to steer me back toward her preferred narrative, but I remained an immovable object, anchored by the truth I had discovered on my own. I wasn't being cruel. I was simply ensuring that they were safe, which was something they had never prioritized when they were busy chasing status and protecting the reputation of the wrong daughter. The house was becoming a skeleton of its former self, echoing with the sounds of boxes being taped shut and the silence of a legacy being dissolved. It was a necessary purging of everything that had been false, leaving behind only the cold, essential reality of our new diminished lives. As the sale of the house neared, the emotional weight of the transition began to press down on everyone, yet my resolve remained entirely unshaken. My sister tried one last time to regain control, attempting to sabotage the final audit by hiding critical documents in an effort to stall the inevitable. I caught her in the act, holding a stack of essential records she was clearly trying to destroy to cover her tracks. I did not yell, nor did I get angry. I simply took the papers from her hands with a calm, steady gaze that told her exactly what she had become. She was a desperate person grasping at a shadow, and I was the person who held the light. I informed her that any further interference would result in immediate legal consequences, a threat that carried the full weight of my prepared evidence. She finally broke, collapsing into a chair and sobbing about how unfair it all was, how she had been promised a life of luxury and comfort. Hearing her whine about fairness, after she had spent 16 years living off the back of my parents' future, was the most pathetic thing I had ever witnessed. I reminded her that fair is a concept for children, and we had long since left childhood behind. I left her in that room, a hollow shell of the golden daughter she once pretended to be, and walked out to continue the work that truly mattered. My mother watched from the doorway, her eyes finally clear, witnessing the truth of her eldest child's character without the filter of her own delusions. It was a moment of profound clarity for her, the exact moment the spell of her favoritism finally snapped. She turned away from my sister and looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something that resembled genuine respect in her eyes. I had not come back to be loved, but to be acknowledged, and that recognition felt more powerful than any inheritance she could have ever given me. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the path forward was becoming clear. The day we finally vacated the house, a heavy, suffocating silence hung in the air as I handed over the keys to the new owners. The structure that had been the epicenter of my family's dysfunction was now just another transaction on a spreadsheet, completely devoid of the emotional power it once held over me. My parents were settled into their new living arrangement, a modest but dignified space that I had meticulously vetted to ensure their well-being. My father seemed surprisingly content, his world having shrunk to the comfort of his chair and the routine care I provided, while my mother had transitioned into a state of quiet acceptance. She spent her days looking through old photos, no longer needing to curate a public image, and often apologized for the blindness that had defined her past. I accepted these apologies not with forgiveness, but with a detached grace. It was too late to change the past, but it was not too late to manage the future. My sister was nowhere to be found, having burned every bridge she had left, effectively exiling herself from the foundation I had salvaged. I felt no urge to track her down, no desire for closure or reconciliation, for she had already become a ghost in my narrative. I had successfully navigated the wreckage, paid the debts, and secured a baseline for my parents' existence, all while maintaining my own autonomy and financial stability. My life was no longer a reaction to their choices, but a deliberate construction of my own design. Walking away from that property for the last time, I didn't feel the need to look back, as there was nothing left to retrieve. I had proven that the empty suitcase they gave me was not a burden, but the very vessel that forced me to develop the strength to carry everything else. The feeling of finality was absolute, a clean break from the chains of my history that had once threatened to pull me under. I stepped into my car, started the engine, and left the remnants of my past behind, moving toward a horizon that was finally and completely my own. With the family crisis resolved, I turned my attention inward to the life I had built in the shadows while they played their dangerous games. I returned to my real office, a space defined by glass, steel, and the quiet humming of high-stakes, financial operations that I had cultivated over a decade. My colleagues knew me as a person of extreme discipline and rare insight, someone who could identify structural weaknesses in an investment before anyone else even suspected a problem. I had not told them the story of my parents or the empty suitcase, nor would I ever. My past was a tool I used for perspective, not a narrative I shared for pity. I watched the markets shift with a keen eye, feeling the familiar, steady rush of navigating complex deals that required absolute focus and unwavering nerve. I had become the architect of my own fortune, investing in real estate, technology, and ventures that promised long-term growth, rather than the short-lived thrills my sister had chased. Every transaction I finalized was a testament to the fact that survival was not just about luck. It was about the cold, calculated ability to endure what others could not. I found a deep, quiet satisfaction in the work, knowing that my bank account was a reflection of my own labor and not the product of a parent's whim. I was finally living in the light, no longer looking over my shoulder for the next wave of chaos from a family that had once tried to erase me. I had successfully replaced the void of my upbringing with a structure of my own making, one that was strong enough to withstand any storm. My resilience had been forged in the crucible of their neglect, and now that same resilience was the foundation of everything I owned. I was no longer defined by what I was given or what was taken from me, but entirely by the immense, quiet power of my own choices and the relentless pursuit of my own truth. I look back at the young, naive girl I once was, the one who stood in that hallway with nothing but an empty suitcase, and I realize she was the most important version of myself I ever encountered. She was the one who refused to shatter when the people who were supposed to love her deemed her worthless. That girl took the trauma, the rejection, and the biting cold of that night and transformed them into a furnace of ambition that powered everything I have become today. I realized that the greatest revenge was not an explosion of anger or a public spectacle of spite. It was the quiet, undeniable success of building a life so stable, so secure, and so entirely mine that the opinions of those who once discarded me became utterly irrelevant. I learned that justice is not something that is handed to you by the people who hurt you. It is a structure you build for yourself, brick by brick, through years of persistence and the refusal to ever accept the role of a victim. I look at my life now, the calm, the clarity, and the absolute command I have over my own destiny, and I see the dividends of that long-ago lesson. The suitcase was never just a container for clothes. It was an invitation to fill my life with substance rather than surface, with action rather than expectation. My parents eventually found peace in their small, managed world, and my sister remains a footnote in a history I have long since closed. I am not the daughter they tried to define, nor am I the sister who competed for their vanishing affection. I am the author of a narrative that is entirely mine. I stand at the peak of what I have constructed, looking out over a horizon that is clear, vast, and completely under my control. The cycle of favoritism and dependency has been broken, not by force, but by the weight of my own competence and the unyielding strength of a woman who was forced to raise herself, and in doing so, achieved the ultimate victory of being truly and unapologetically free. I have come to realize that the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who has nothing is to underestimate their capacity to build everything from scratch. I am Jessica Neves, and I have transformed my greatest tragedy into the foundation of my most enduring strength. I walked away from a family that valued money over blood, and in the process, I discovered that true wealth is not found in a trust fund or a golden inheritance, but in the ironclad resilience of a soul that has learned how to survive the darkest of winters. My journey serves as a final, quiet testament to the idea that you are the sole author of your reality, and no one has the authority to dictate your worth but you. I have replaced their corruption with my own integrity, and their hollow promises with a life of absolute, uncompromising purpose. There is a deep, intoxicating peace in knowing that I saved those who would have let me fall, not because I owed them anything, but because I was strong enough to afford the mercy they never once showed me. My story is not just a tale of revenge, but a blueprint for anyone who has been told they are nothing. It is a map for those ready to claim their own justice. I have crossed the finish line of my own transformation, and the view from this summit is exactly what I deserved all along. If you have ever felt discarded, if you have ever been told that the world is your only inheritance, then my journey is your roadmap to reclaiming your own power. Do not wait for an apology that will never come, and do not look for validation in the hands that pushed you away. Take your suitcase, build your empire, and let your success be the only answer they ever receive. My life is the proof that justice is a dish best served with the relentless, quiet strength of a woman who rose from nothing to hold everything. If this story of resilience and hard-won victory touched your soul, hit that button to follow my journey and subscribe for more stories of justice, strength, and the power of building a life that is entirely your own. Your turn to rise is coming, so stay strong and keep moving forward. Like and subscribe.